Today, we're going to be working on perspective drawing. To start off though, what is perspective drawing? It's a term that comes up frequently when we talk about art in general, but it's pretty simple at a basic level. It is about emulating how objects fit into the real world. At a basic level, it might start with something as simple as if you have something that's close to you in the foreground, a tree, for example, that tree is going to look bigger the closer it is to you. If you have another tree that's further in the background, that tree is obviously going to look smaller. If we had blades of grass here at the beginning and we had some other ones back there, they are going to be smaller. In fact, as objects move even further back into space, not only are they going to continue to get smaller, they're going to appear lighter as well. And this is called atmospheric perspective. But in general, perspective is just about putting objects into our real space and emulating what that looks like. If you are at the base of a giant building in New York City, or even our, smaller city of Denver here in Colorado, if you look straight up at the building, it will seem like the top of the building is actually getting further away. It is getting smaller. And this is another form of perspective. We can emulate this in our drawings. Another is just the fact that some objects are going to show us different sides of themselves depending on how they're oriented in space. If we look down at a box that is on the floor, we're going to see the top of it. We're not going to see the bottom. If, however, in some strange world, we had a box that was floating above us, we would actually see the bottom of it. In my brain, every time I do this exercise, I'm reminded of the Borg cube, and a little piece of my childhood self is struck with fear. But at a very basic level, perspective is just this. It is emulating how objects sit in our real world. If you try to draw things that are far away and make them the same size as things that are close up, innately and unconsciously, our mind knows that something is wrong. Well, what are the basic types of perspective drawing then? The most basic is referred to as one-point perspective, and we'll get into what that means in a moment. Two-point is slightly more advanced and a little bit more accurate, though it still has some fundamental issues. Three-point is probably the most accurate of the basic kinds of perspective drawings, and then what you have after this is just the natural world. The fact that basically everything on its own axis is getting smaller as it moves away from us. We will start here because it's the most simple and it gives us a stepping stone to get to the others. In time, we will hit all of these. And hopefully by the end of this set of videos and exercises and practices, you'll have a better understanding of how to make things look like they fit into whatever environment you're working in. Whether you're working in things that are just going to go into comics or into simple pixelated video games, or even if you're trying to draw the world around you in an accurate way, perspective and an understanding of it is always going to be helpful. Well, let's start with one-point perspective then. First of all, what do we mean by a point? Why do we call it one point? Well, let's start with a singular point. This point is our vanishing point. It is the point at which everything is going to extend backward into space. Now, in this kind of drawing, the best thing we can do is set ourselves up with a horizon line. For those of you who live in countries or places where you live on plains, you are going to see the horizon. It's going to be a basic part of your life. We have mountains on one side, so if I look to the west, there are no horizon lines. But if I look out to the east, where the plains kind of go into Nebraska and Kansas, we always have this almost perfect line where the sky meets the ground. That is what we're emulating with our horizon line. Our vanishing point will always be on the horizon line in this form of drawing. Though if you were doing something in space, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. So one-point perspective has a single vanishing point. And then we have our horizon line to go along with it. Let's start by drawing a sample object here and seeing how it interacts in this space and how we can emulate perspective. Generally, when I start teaching this, I will use rulers, and I will actually in the next lesson. But for the basics and the understanding of what we're doing here, I think it's okay today to just use a pencil. And it's important, though I spend a lot of time on this channel and in my work working with pens, it is important to do this with a pencil at the beginning stages because you will be erasing things and you just want to save yourself some potential agitation. So I've started with just a square here, and we're going to turn this square into a three-dimensional object. We're going to start by connecting each of its corners back to this vanishing point. I'm going to rotate my wrist in whatever way seems the most comfortable. There's definitely going to be times in this form of drawing where I will have to rotate the drawing canvas that I'm working on, like this or this. I have an easier time drawing straight lines this way, so drawing a horizon line even like this can be a little bit difficult. Just understand that you will probably have to shift the way that you're drawing to make it more comfortable. Now you'll notice I didn't connect this point, and that's because that would go through our object. If we were making an object that was transparent or made of glass, that would be prudent. But right now, it's simply not. So we've got our lines heading back in space, and we want to cut our object to turn it into something resembling a cube. So I am going to move down here and create a line in between the two vanishing lines I constructed. I'm going to be careful to make sure this line and this line are parallel to one another. That will allow this to look accurate. One of the easiest mistakes that people make is when they fail to make their lines parallel. I'm rotating my canvas here so that I can make this line pretty easily and make another parallel line there as well. Now, if I darken in this line a little bit and darken in this line a little bit, you can see I actually have something that resembles a three-dimensional object. I'm going to come in here real quickly with my comically oversized eraser and remove those excess lines, and you'll see we have something that really does emulate a three-dimensional object. We also have only three types of lines in this kind of drawing, at least for now. And those are lines like this, which are horizontal, lines like this, which are vertical, and lines like this, which are vanishing. The vanishing lines are always going to go back toward that vanishing point. All right, let's try another object and see how that affects us. I'll try to do one that's a little bit bigger, maybe easier to see here. Again, if you want to start this off by using a ruler to help you, that is totally fine. I will in the next lesson. So we have a much larger object here, and our next step is the same as it was last time. We are going to draw lines back and forth to our vanishing point. This might seem very basic for you, and if you grew up with any drawing, there's a good chance that you covered this stuff when you were younger. It's never a bad idea, though, to revisit these kinds of things. It's an easy thing to practice, and the more you practice it, the more it becomes second nature. So again, on this object, I'm going to go ahead and cut it. That's often how I refer to it, using parallel lines. You'll notice that these lines are very close to each other. And that happens because the closer we get to the horizon line, the more compact things will be. In fact, one of the next drawings we're going to do is going to be an object over top of the horizon line, and we'll see what that does. So if I go ahead and take my eraser in here, I can erase these excess lines and make this object into a three-dimensional object, rather than just a series of awkward flat lines. You'll notice this eraser is not necessarily the best for this job, and that's fine. You, when you're starting off, might not have all of the supplies that you really want. If you don't have a ruler for making this kind of stuff, you can always just take an extra sheet of paper, and as long as you're very careful, you can often use it to line out and create the lines that you want. So that functioned just fine. Now, let's go ahead and we're going to do two more. We're going to do one over here that is over top of our horizon line, and we'll see what that looks like. You'll notice very quickly when you do this, though, as you draw your lines back, that we only have two places that we can draw our lines from this time. These other two corners are hidden, and if we were to draw from them back to the vanishing point, we would go through our object. We don't want to do that right now. Maybe in the future we'll do some fun, goofy things that way, but for now, we're simply going to cut this object. You'll notice this is significantly easier because we have fewer things to mess with. This object we cannot see the top of or the bottom of because it exists on our horizon line. This is actually how we look at most buildings. If you walk out front and look at the building that you live in right now, you are above the horizon line, so you cannot see the bottom of it, but the top of the building is above the horizon line, so you cannot see the top of it. This is just how we exist with most structures. It's why something like this immediately starts looking like a building, and either of these prior objects look more like boxes. Our subconscious or unconscious mind is putting that into a frame that makes sense to us. If I erase this and this, we will get something that is accurate and sits on its own. But to finish off this lesson, we're going to do a shape that's a little bit different. I think it's always good at the end of a lesson like this to try something that doesn't quite fit in with all the rules and see if you can apply the same kind of logic. I would often do this in my classroom as well. It worked well sometimes, and with younger kids, they're often frustrated, but that's part of being an educator. So this object obviously doesn't have any corners. So what we're going to do, and this is actually easiest to show with a ruler, is if you line your ruler up with your vanishing point and then move it until it hits the edge of the object, eventually you will hit just a single edge and you can draw a line back from there. That will give you the edge. Now I can do this freehand because I've done this for a very long time. But I would encourage you when you're doing this kind of object with any kind of curves, it's easiest just to use the ruler and slide it over. You're just emulating the same thing we did down here. It's just a little bit more difficult. Now, how do we cut this object? Well, if you think about it, what we did down here is we just took this line and moved a parallel version of it down in order to cut the object. And we will actually do the same thing here. So we're going to try to emulate this curve. And it's not nearly as easy as the others, but you know what? We're working in pencil. If we make a mistake, we can just go ahead and fix it. So I like to ghost the line that I'm trying to make, so kind of cement it in my mind as far as what kind of curve it's going to be, and then come down here and make it. And if it helps you, you can actually make the entire circle to make sure the curve is accurate, and that will give you everything you need. So that should function. If I take my eraser here, I should be able to come up right along the edges, erase the excess here, and I will actually end up with a three-dimensional cylinder. I'm going to redarken some of these lines. And we have a three-dimensional cylinder. Now imagine for a second if I added some shading on this, the underside being dark, obviously, and then fading up to lighter on the upper edge. You can really understand how that comes into being. Well, this has been lesson 1 in perspective drawing. I have no idea how many there will be. As I continue to unpack things, I'm going to just continue to build these out. They will not all come out in sequence, but I imagine once I get to the end of 1 point perspective, I will put a large video together that has all of them. I would not be surprised if it's somewhere between 8 and 15 lessons for 1 point perspective alone, but we will have to go through all of this in order to really kind of cement the skills that you need for 2 point and 3 point. And 3 point and natural perspective are going to be where you're going to just implement these things in a way that no one can tell that they're perspective drawing. They are just going to fluidly blend with everything you're doing. But that said, even the lessons here are going to apply to basically any kind of drawing you're working on. 1 point perspective shows up frequently. In our lives, it shows up most commonly when you look down a hallway. So if you go out, if you live in an apartment, or if you're going to go to school today, walk into a hallway and look down, and if you see all of the lines are going to merge into a singular point in the center. These might be where the lockers are, or doors and windows. This is the floor and the tile and the ceiling. That's just kind of how our world is built. 1 point shows up less frequently than 2 point and 3 point, but it is still a common occurrence in our life. So I hope you'll come along with me as we go through the rest of these. Well, as always, thanks for being here, and I hope this was a benefit to you. Thank you to my patrons as well, who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out my Patreon, it is linked below. We also have a Discord server for all kinds of things like this, especially if you want to practice your perspective drawing and want to get some feedback from other people. You can check that out in the link below as well. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.